Welcome to the Skinny Podcast. It's the weekly potpourri edition. I'm Richard Skinner, Local12.com digital sports columnist and editor with Rick Broering. As always, it's presented by Blake, the attorney Maislin. Have a little audio difficulty today, or actually technical difficulty today with my laptop and the microphone. So we're kind of doing this impromptu style, I guess, as I'm doing this on the app on my phone. But we'll get through it. Hopefully, it'll still be enjoyable and listenable. And Rick, with that, let's go.
Yeah, the goal is always listenable here, and
Yeah.
hopefully this meets that mark. So we'll start with the Bengals. Skinny, another 1-point loss to the Ravens, 35-34 on Sunday. I listened to your recap with Trags. I listened to all types of things this week. And Skinny, basically what I'm hearing is a lot of talking, but I'm not hearing a lot of answers from the Bengals media types, the Bengals coaching staff, anybody really talking about this team right now. You and Trags talked on your recap podcast about how this team just isn't good enough to win close games at this point. I mean, we have enough evidence to make that statement. Given that's the case, and I agree with you guys on that, are we at the point where it's just like Duke Tobin and the front office simply have to be better when it comes to constructing the roster? Are we pointing back to the free agency class they just had and the past drafts they have and said basically this isn't good enough and that's the reason this team is where they are right now?
I think that's absolutely it, Rick. And I don't think complacency set in after they got Joe Burrow and T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, but that's kind of what it feels like, that they thought they were good enough to build the rest of the roster through the draft and then to go supplement through some free agents. And it hasn't worked. I mean, it just hasn't. Geno Stone and Von Bell were supposed to be an upgraded safety. They're not. 2 second-round corners are struggling, DJ Turner and Cam Taylor-Britt. Outside of Trey Hendrickson, no one can rush the passer, including free agent signee Sheldon Rankins, including last year's first-round draft pick Myles Murphy. On the offensive side of things, outside of Jamar Chase, when T. Higgins is hurt, you don't really have anybody else in the wide receiver room, and you're counting on Mike Gesicki or a running back. And, it almost that's where the sweeping changes, I think, have to come in this organization after this year. I'm not here to tell you they still don't make a run for the playoffs, because I think they do, Rick, because I think there's enough winnable games left. And the fact that the last AFC wildcard team is going to come down to somebody going 9-8, I think they can make a run. I think this season's still salvageable. I don't know if the future is, however, at the current rate that they're building the roster. They're doing a horrible job of roster construction, and no one wants to seem to recognize that fact in the organization.
That's been the biggest concern I've had over the last few weeks, is that we're trending in a direction where, yeah, this season may not feel good right now, but you better cling on to the hope that you have left for this season, because I'm not sure where they go from here. And the fact that we're now sitting here talking about they can't get drafts right, they've tried to make splashes in free agency. And honestly, when I look at this year's roster construction, that's my biggest issue with this team, is the fact that Geno Stone and Sheldon Rankins are flops, basically. I mean, that's your biggest issue. If those two guys were good, this defense would be at least passable, and this team would have won a couple of those close games by now, and you'd be in a much different spot. So when I look at it, I see that as the biggest issue. And going forward, I don't know how they solve that issue. Is it a being cheap problem? Is it they just don't have competent people in those roles problem? And if that's the case, is it because you're not paying them enough? You're not paying enough of them to be good? I don't know what the issue is there, and I don't think they probably do either.
No, but I think that starts with ownership to have to make those tough decisions and say, you know what, we aren't building the roster very well. We did cheap out in not maybe paying Jesse Bates. We did cheap out in maybe not paying Jamar Chase when we should have paid him. It almost feels like that once they got to the Super Bowl, it was, okay, we've got enough, and we'll just supplement a few things here and there, and we still got Joe Burrow. Well, that was part of the conversation, the bigger conversation that Mike and I had after the game, of we're on opposite sides of the fence of Jamar Chase. And I don't think he fully understood my point, because most people are in the camp of, well, you got to sign him. You do, but if you're going to sign Jamar Chase and not be able to address the rest of the roster or do it through good drafts, you're going to be left with Carson Palmer and Chad Johnson. You're going to be left with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase putting up big numbers and not winning games. I mean, the Baltimore game was proof of that. Those guys, maybe Burrow could have played a little better on a couple of passes, but in theory, in the grand scheme of things, those two guys couldn't have played any better, and you still lost. And that's where it feels like this is trending. If you sign Jamar Chase and don't do anything or don't have the resources to do anything else, because I don't trust them to draft. The track record is there at the moment.
I don't know why this team's struggles have led people to the belief that you have to sign Jamar Chase and you have to sign T. Higgins. If anything, I think it's the exact opposite. I think we now have proof that, hey, those couple of guys, those couple of receivers and Joe Burrow aren't enough for this team to be a top-tier NFL team. And that's really concerning because I think most of us believed that if you just have those guys, it's enough. You're going to have a chance every single year. And we've seen very clearly this year that that is not the case. So, you mentioned Jamar Chase. I want to ask you about him. Do you think, given the way he's playing this year, which is probably the best receiver in the NFL at this point,
Yep.
do you think the Bengals made a mistake by not giving him his money this past offseason when he wanted it?
Yeah, I'm going to say I don't because again, you had him under contract at a reasonable rate, and I think that's just the way the ball bounces. And I know it's going to probably cost you more if you are going to sign him, but they had a number in mind. Jamar's camp had a number in mind. That's how this stuff works. The twain didn't meet, and now we'll see how it goes in the next offseason. And it feels like the complacency came that we've got these handful of guys, and that's enough for us. Yeah, you could argue, well, they weren't complacent in going out and signing Orlando Brown. No, I'll give you that. You weren't complacent in that. But, if then you're signing these high-priced guys, you're paying a left tackle, you're paying a quarterback, you're going to have to pay a wide receiver, you're paying Trey Hendrickson, then you better start hitting on draft picks, and you just haven't done that. And now you're at the stage of you're going to probably need a right guard sooner rather than later. You're probably going to need a center sooner rather than later. You may need a left guard sooner rather than later. I mean, you're going to need back to interior defensive line help, another edge rusher, a veteran corner. You've got so many needs at the moment that it's just not enough to say, well, we paid Jamar Chase and we paid Joe Burrow. Great. And then what?
I also don't know that we know that Jamar Chase has made himself a bunch more money than he would have had the Bengals sign him. Everyone keeps saying that, but that's not exactly how the market works for contracts.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You don't start at a certain number, then accumulate stats throughout the year, play really well, and the number just keeps increasing. The market is set by whoever the highest paid guy is at your position. And Jamar Chase, from what we understand, already wanted to be paid as the highest guy before he had this season. So if you're the Bengals, why not? If you're going to have to pay him as the highest paid receiver regardless, why not make him prove it this year and let him get through the year healthy and then give him the most money out of all the receivers? No. If you did that before this year when you didn't have to, what happens if he gets hurt? What happens if he has a bad year? Then you overpaid for something that it might not have been worth. Now, okay, it's clearly worth it. You're going to have to pay him as the highest paid receiver anyway. Now you have to pay him as the highest paid receiver, and it's obvious.
Well, I think it's a great point because the wide receiver market got reset this offseason, and I'm not sure who the next one is other than Jamar Chase to reset the wide receiver market, right? So right. It's not like suddenly you have to go out and sign him for $160 million because somebody else did it. Who else is there to do it? I mean, CeeDee Lamb signed, Justin Jefferson signed, Jamar Chase is in that category, if not higher than both of those guys. And to your point, you're right about that. People keep talking about, well, costing yourself more money. Are you? Maybe a little bit, but I don't think, again, if you want to be the highest paid wide receiver, it can be $1 million more than Justin Jefferson. And that's maybe where they were even in this past offseason, where the Bengals balked at that.
Yeah, maybe it's 20 million, Skinny, but maybe right. Jamar Chase and his people were already wanting 20 million more than Justin Jefferson this offseason. We don't know exactly where that number was this past offseason. So it's unfair for us to sit here and say right. they now have to pay him a lot more than they would have this past offseason. It might be the same exact number for all we know.
And that's where I go back to, again, it's all fun and games until guys start needing to be paid. And I'm not here to tell you, begrudge them that they don't need to get paid. But, man, it's all fun and games when you got the stars on rookie contracts, isn't it? And then it all changes so damn fast.
It does. You mentioned, too, that this team is still alive in the playoff hunt. And, they really are. You look at NFL.com, it has them sitting at a 27% chance to make the playoffs right now. But it bumps all the way up to 39% with a win over the Chargers on Sunday night. They're also one game back of the Broncos, who are currently the team sitting in the third wildcard spot. And, by the way, they host the Broncos on December 29th. So if it's coming down, Skinny, Lance McAllister phrased it this way, and I thought it was a really good way to look at it. If it's coming down to the Broncos, the Colts, and the Bengals for that final wildcard spot in the AFC, which team are you betting on? Are you betting on the team led by Bo Nix, the team led by the combo of Joe Flacco and Anthony Richardson? Are you betting on the team led by Joe Burrow? Simply put, we all want to be negative about this team in Cincinnati, but it's a pretty obvious answer if you're an outsider.
Yeah, and the other part to it is you play a team with a losing record in Dallas, a team with a losing record in Tennessee, a team with a losing record in Cleveland. Those are three which should be wins. That gets you to, even if you don't win this weekend, that gets you to 7. You got Pittsburgh at home. That could get you to 8. And then you got Denver coming in, which would be 9. And 9-8 probably does it with the tiebreaker over Denver. So, as I mentioned before, while we're talking in negative tones here, this season is salvageable. I don't know where the long term is salvageable.
Well, and it's especially salvageable because of the way that Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow are playing right now. I mean, Joe Burrow was, again, just ridiculously good this past Thursday. Now, you can talk about a couple of decisions he made that you'd like to have back, I think. But aside from those two decisions, which were very costly, I mean, the throws he was making, the plays he was making to single-handedly keep this team going in that game, it's absurd that they can't find a way to win with this guy right now.
Agreed. I mean, to think of what he's done in the 2 games against Baltimore, and you're 0-2 in those 2 games. To think of the times this team has scored in the 30s this year and lost is insane. I think it's been proven that when they play good competition, they aren't quite good enough. I think that's now been proven. They're 0-5 against teams with a winning record this year. So I think that part's been proven. But that's where I go back to, you don't face a lot of those teams down the stretch here. You just don't.
And I know this is all part of it, but like as much as we say that, you are a very questionable and probably bad call away from beating the Chiefs.
Right.
You are a young running back fumbling the ball at an inexplicable moment for no reason away from winning 2 weeks ago. I mean, like there's all these little things that, and that's your point, like they're just not good enough if those things keep happening. But in a lot of ways, it doesn't feel like it's a talent thing. It's a potential thing. It's a skill thing. It feels like they have the pieces to win these games and they just keep coming up short. So from a hope standpoint, do they still have a chance standpoint, it does feel like there's enough there if they can have the ball bounce their way a couple weeks in a row that they can still sneak in here. Joe Burrow had a very playful disposition at his weekly press conference with you guys this week. What did you make of that? Because he didn't sound that way at all after the game on Thursday, and understandably so. But what did you make of his sort of very talkative, very playful disposition?
Yeah, maybe the fact of listen, he's kind of been a Debbie Downer the last couple of weeks, and I think he's put a lot of pressure on himself. That maybe this was a way to just say, you know what, we got nothing to lose. Let's just go out and play. That's kind of what it felt like. And the way he's playing right now, he should have a ton of confidence because he's playing really, really well. I just kind of took it as a guy that decided to not be quite as serious, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that in a way of, instead of continue to put internal pressure or feeling the pressure, let's just let the pressure loose and go ball and see what happens.
He almost seems like a guy that might need that occasionally. Need to take a step back and be like, all right, I mean, it's bad. You don't like losing, but it's not the end of the world. No one's dead yet. So let's trudge forward. This Bengals Chargers matchup, when you look at it, it's hard not to look at the Burrow Herbert matchup with the way those two guys are playing right now, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I look at more the Bengals offense versus the Chargers top-ranked defense, to be honest with you, as a whole. But yeah, that narrative's always going to be there. The Bengals coaching staff openly, when even in the Senior Bowl process, really liked Justin Herbert. They had him in the Senior Bowl. They liked him a lot. Joe Burrow was the guy. Joe Burrow was always the guy. But I think they like Joe. I know they like Justin Herbert a lot. So yeah, certainly those two guys come out of the same draft class. That becomes a storyline. And to your point,
they're playing so well right now too. That's the thing. It's like we've gotten this far along. They've always been kind of linked together, and this year they're just balling out.
Yeah, and Herbert in a little bit less gaudy number manner, right? I mean, he's not throwing for tons of yardage, but he's been accurate. He's been very careful with the football. He's only thrown 1 interception all season long. He's doing what Jim Harbaugh asks of him in that offense. When you need him to make a throw, he makes a throw. He made some plays with his legs the other day in their win this past week over Tennessee. Their goal is don't turn it over. Our defense is good enough. We have a good running game, and we have a quarterback when we need him to make a play, make a play. Where the Bengals are, they have a quarterback that has to make a play all the time and throw for 350 to 400 yards to win games against good teams. So they're doing it in different manners, but yeah, both playing at a real high level.
And the Chargers defense is so good at taking away those big plays, the throws downfield. Do you feel like this? I mean, obviously it's a tough matchup for the Bengals. Do you feel like this sets up for one of those dink and dunk days where it's going to be hard for them to score points?
I will say I think they've done a better job, and talking to Dan Pitcher yesterday, they've done a better job of moving Jamar all over the place in formations and then finding him a way to get him open kind of in those intermediate routes. And he made a good point of if teams want to jump him underneath the intermediate routes or grab him, is what he said. We'll throw to somebody over top of that. And if they don't, and he gets behind that, it gets into that second level where we're able to work him off of some of the formation stuff, get him the ball on the run. Well, then look out. And you saw that against Baltimore, that play right in the middle of the field, right down the seam on a kind of a crosser, and he takes it the rest of the way for a touchdown. And I think they've done a really good job of scheming that up. I think Justin Riscotti, who's the passing game coordinator who came from Minnesota, has helped with that some. I know Dan was really high on talking about what he has brought to the table, because one of the things that Minnesota was noted for, right, was being able to, and you heard all the time, why can't the Bengals scheme Jamar Chase open more? Why can Minnesota scheme Justin Jefferson open more? So Justin Riscotti's brought probably some of those ways to scheme him open more. And then if T. Higgins comes back and plays this week, whatever level that is, that's a huge, huge plus. It gives you finally a second weapon. They've really struggled to find that without T. I mean, Jermaine Burton got a bunch of snaps the other night. He did have a nice third down catch, but that was kind of it. Andre Yoshavash has almost disappeared entirely in this offense. And then really your second best, option at the moment without T has been Mike Gesicki, and that's fine and dandy, but you really don't want him to be the number two guy. You want it to be a wide receiver like T. Higgins. So get T back this week. You're probably not going to get downfield shots that you'd like to take, and you may have to take some of the shorter stuff, but I do think it gives you another receiver to help in those regards.
Any final thoughts on the Bengals here before we move on to college football?
No, and I know everybody comes to the must-win mantra. I'm not even there yet. Like I said, 9-8 gets you in. You got a bunch of winnable games after this. This would be, to me, you go out and win this one, I think you take a huge step towards that, because I think you almost go steal one if you go win this one on the road.
All right, let's move on to college football, where the new college football playoff bracket projection is out. And I mean, every time I look at this, I mean, there's only been 2 of them so far, but every time I look at these that they put out, it just, I don't know, something about it just kind of catches me off guard. I notice new things, different things stand out to me. For whatever reason, it just doesn't feel the way that I expected it to feel when I look at the bracket. For instance, this week, a couple of things that I've been thinking a lot about is, 4 Big Ten teams and 4 SEC teams both being in there. I think we all knew that it would be dominated by those 2 conferences, but just kind of looking how it plays out, it is interesting when you're seeing like an Alabama as a 10 seed here. I think that throws some chaos into this mix. If you're Indiana and you're getting to this tournament and you get Alabama as the 10 seed, that just feels really difficult to me. And the other thing, good for the local Ohio State fans, that 5 seed where Ohio State is right now feels like an awesome place to be in. You get the 12th seed, the worst team in the tournament, which right now would be Boise State. And then you would get currently Miami or potentially BYU if the Big 12 were to win. But those would be the worst. You would get the 4 seed, the worst winner from the conferences. And then at that point, you're in the semifinals, potentially playing Oregon right now as it would set up. The top seeds right now are Oregon as the 1 seed, Texas as the 2 seed, BYU as the 3 seed, and Miami as the 4 seed. Skinny, what were your thoughts when you saw the new bracket projections?
Yeah, I mean, nothing much changed other than the fact that Georgia's actually ranked 12th, but they are the 13th seed, if you will, at the moment. They're the first seed out because of the way things shake out, and the fact that the Group of 5 team Boise is in by an automatic qualifier at the moment. There's a lot to be had, because to your point of what you're talking about from a matchup perspective, let's just say for argument's sake, it's Ohio State and Oregon in the Big Ten title game, and Ohio State loses. Will they still be a 5 seed, or will they slide down? If Ohio State wins, then how high up do they go? Because then they get the automatic qualifying spot in one of those byes. So there's still a lot to change. I mean, Georgia-Tennessee this week. Does Georgia play its way back in with a win at home over Tennessee? It probably does. Does that knock Tennessee out, or does that knock if Indiana were to lose in ugly fashion? I know it's not this week, it's next week, but let's just say they lose in ugly fashion to Ohio State. Does that knock them all the way out? Probably unfairly, because that would only be their first loss of the year. So there's still so much to be played out with all this stuff. And even like a Miami, because I think the ACC is only going to get its champion in. They're technically they're the champion at the moment, but that could change a lot too by who wins the ACC championship game. And same for the Big 12. I don't think the Big 12 gets a second team. And even if BYU were to run the table, in my opinion, and then lose the Big 12 championship game, I'm not sure they get in.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. Listening to people that are covering the college football playoff a bit more closely, the refrain seems to be that they don't intend on punishing teams for playing in their conference championship game. Meaning if you're a 2-loss team that's projected to be in and you make your conference championship and you lose, that shouldn't put you out of the tournament. That sounds great in theory, Skinny, but when we're talking about some of these teams that are directly competing against each other head to head to get into the tournament, I don't know how that wouldn't have an impact if you lose another game in the champion. I mean, it's fascinating to think about how this is all going to play out over the coming weeks.
Yeah, I just don't see how the ACC or the Big 12 get a second team in. I just don't.
I don't think they will either, but even just your scenario that you're talking about in the SEC, if Georgia beats Tennessee, you would think that would have to put Georgia into the tournament or into the bracket at this point. But then like Ole Miss is the 11 seed, the second to last team in the tournament. Just Georgia jumped them after Ole Miss just smacked them around? Like that can't be the case. So,
no, right.
I mean, the SEC is creating all types of chaos for this.
Yeah, I did a radio interview. I do one every Monday at a Lexington station. The host brought up, he goes, what if, and he rattled off, 5 or 6 teams: Ole Miss, Tennessee, Georgia, Bama, Texas A&M. I'm drawing a blank on whoever the other one was, but anyway, he said, "What do you do if there's like 6 of them sitting at 10-2?" I go, "I don't know. Put their name in a fishbowl and draw the 4 out that you like." I mean, I don't know what you do.
And it is funny because for some of these teams, like Indiana, for instance, if they were Ohio State or they were the Big Ten, a different Big Ten team or a different SEC team, them sitting undefeated, even though they've played a weaker schedule, they wouldn't be the 7th seed. Like if Ohio State was undefeated playing the same schedule as Indiana, they would be the 1 or the 2 seed. They would not be the 7th seed. So you've still got all of those elements playing in here too, which is interesting to think about. Looking at the local teams, Kentucky was off. Ohio State was basically off as they beat Purdue 45-0, and Cincinnati fell 31-24 to Pittsburgh. Skinny, watching Cincinnati, for me, it just they're right there. I mean, they had their chances. They fought back in this game after getting down by multiple scores, but it just feels like their offense is extremely conservative right now, and they make some plays, but they don't push the ball downfield at all, and it is honestly boring to watch.
Well, and Brendan Sorsby has been pretty good this year. I mean, he just made 2 egregious errors. I mean, the 2 turnovers were just completely egregious, in my opinion. At some point, you just gotta let another. You just play for the next play. The push pass that was intercepted and run back for a touchdown, then the one he threw laterally that turned out to be a lateral fumble. It now has UC behind the 8 ball. They got 2 tough places to go play in Iowa State and Kansas State. Not going to even be close to being favored in either. It would be an upset if they win in either place. And then 5 and 6 to play TCU in the regular season finale. Lose that, and I'm not sure you feel like the program made great strides. I think they made some strides, but not the strides that it looked like. I mean, at 5-2, we were talking about, hey, maybe you can play your way if you get play well and steal the one at Colorado, and hey, get some momentum going. Maybe you play your way to the Big 12 championship game. Well, silly me on that one. Now you're fighting for bowl eligibility, and I thought at a minimum this needed to be a bowl eligibility season.
Yeah, you had pegged that from the start of the season when we were doing our preseason show. You were saying this is a bowl team this year, and I didn't see that. The way it played out, they were much closer than I expected. It looked like they were going to easily be in, but now, to your point, they lost 2 in a row, one of them being the Colorado game, which obviously they weren't expected to win, but you have that upcoming schedule of at Iowa State, at Kansas State, and then home against TCU. Make the call, Skinny. Do you think they win another game to become bowl eligible?
I don't. I just don't. I think it. That at the point of what could happen the next 2 weeks, you're suddenly hanging your dauber a little bit, and even though you're back home for that last game with a chance to get bowl eligible, not like you've been great at home this year either, have you? And I think that's the disappointing part. I mean, just turn around the loss to Pitt and the loss to West Virginia, two teams that are meh. I know Pitt's only lost 1 game, but they're to me.
And they should have won the Pitt game. They had that one in the bag.
Correct. But flip those 2 around, and you're sitting at 7-2 going into these next 2 games, and comfortably in bowl spot, and a chance then to get to an 8th win in the TCU game instead of fighting for bowl eligibility. So again, it's not like you've been great at home.
Yeah, the Pitt game they should have won. The West Virginia game they were trying to come from behind. I didn't really expect them to ever win that one, but yeah, that Pitt one looking back is a difficult pill to swallow. Let's move on to college basketball, Skinny. We'll talk more about the college football matchups this weekend in our Pick'em segment, but with college basketball, we have to start with the Kentucky Wildcats. They are back. I mean, the win over Duke, 77-72 of the Champions Classic, come from behind fashion. Even the most hardened, old, crusty, always has something negative to say about this team fan is back on the Cats right now. They're
There's no
giddy,
question.
Skinny. They're calling up their old buddies. They're meeting at the coffee shop for breakfast and talking about these Cats. Like, Mark Pope has this fan base in a place that I haven't seen him since really probably the first couple of years of Cal's tenure.
And I don't know if there were expectations that they were going to win this game. And I even think if they hadn't won this game and played what would have been a close game in the end, they made the plays down the stretch and Duke didn't, and kudos to them for that. But even if let's just say they hadn't and Duke had made the plays and Cooper Flagg, who was great, doesn't turn the ball over twice down the stretch and Duke wins it, I still think you'd have come away going, hey, this is going in the right direction. The win makes it even take that next jump forward of where can this team go? How far can this team go? Because let's not forget, their alleged best player, and I don't mean this in a bad, but I mean, he's their alleged best player. Jackson Robinson scored how many points, Rick?
I don't even remember. It was single digits.
One.
Yeah, I mean, it was
1 point, and they still beat Duke.
Yeah, no, I mean, it jumps out at you. And Kentucky fans don't want to admit this, Skinny. They didn't expect to win that game. They've gotten used to losing those games, used to losing to Duke. I think that's part of why there's so much elation after this win. And you mentioned Cooper Flagg. He had 26 points and 12 rebounds for Duke. Everyone's crushing him because of the late turnovers, the fact that he didn't come up in the moment. I thought he was really fun to watch. I love the fact that even though he's a skilled, bigger player, he's not a finesse guy. He just attacks you. He goes to the free throw line a ton. He plays physical, and I like his style. But watching the Kentucky guys, there's a lot to like. And to your point, Jackson Robinson is supposed to be their best offensive player. He wasn't good in this game, but man, I thought, Andrew Carr led them with 17 points, had 5 rebounds and 3 assists, but I loved Otega Owe.
Yeah,
I think he's tough. He's athletic. He can defend the other team's best player if you need him to, but he shoots it better than I thought. He's a better ball handler than I thought. I just really love what he brings to them on the offensive end.
And I think the fact that, I don't know how long he does this, and maybe he does it all year. Maybe this was the proof of the way to do it, of playing so many guys, for the most part, so little minutes. I mean, he really spreads the minutes out among these guys, and you could see it. Duke was gassed. In fact, John Shire even talked about, and we got to figure out how to keep guys from cramping. We got to do something different in our pregame training for games. He's taking a critical eye towards that, and part of that's true. Part of that is Duke didn't have a bench to go to. Maybe that is what Mark Pope, maybe that is the strength of this team, is you put a lot of different combinations, a lot of different guys out there, and really you're not going to have a letdown, and you're going to wear the other team out. It's not Rick Pitino pressing for 40 minutes, but it's a frenetic style of play. And, if you're playing your best guys 23 minutes, 25 minutes, you're playing 8, 9, 10 guys, 17 plus minutes, and you don't feel like you're getting a drop off whenever whoever's in the game is in the game, I think you can take a toll on some teams, because I don't think there are a lot of teams in the country anymore that have very deep rotations.
Well, and they're constantly moving on the offensive end too. So you have that other team chasing you, defending all your actions. I do think there is a fatigue factor that plays into it for this team. But even those guys off the bench, I mean, I had mentioned when we were talking about our concerns for the teams, the local teams going into the season, I was a little bit concerned about Kentucky's front court. And, Amari Williams has been very solid for what they need him to be. And then behind him in this game, I thought Brandon Garrison was great off the bench. He looked really good for them.
Yeah, made it 3. I mean, he was very, very good. That's my point. I just don't know where the drop-off is. And here's the thing. I guarantee you on this podcast, we're hardly ever going to bring up Lamont Butler. But Lamont Butler, he's my kind of guy. He just does everything at the level a coach wants and trusts and knows he's going to do the right thing.
That's hilarious you said that, because that was the last thing I wanted to hit on. Was Lamont Butler is going to be an absolute UK fan favorite. He's just a grinder. He's tough. He's physical. He's the type of player that UK fans have wanted for a while. And he's not as flashy. He's not going to be the next star point guard in the NBA like NKU has been running through here for the last decade. But he is exactly what UK fans have been missing at that spot. So it's fun to watch around here. Like, I personally am going to miss some of the talent that we saw at Kentucky. It's just different. Not what every year it felt like we were watching one of the next great NBA stars play for Kentucky. I don't think that's going to be the case anymore. They just don't look the same out there. The offense looks so different. But for Kentucky fans to be this excited, it makes local basketball more fun.
So I've obviously tried to follow a little bit of Arkansas, right, just to see, not in a macabre way, even though they got smacked around by Baylor and took a loss and didn't play. They actually were down at halftime to Troy last night and came back and won. But I'm just looking at some of the UK players. Adu Thiero's playing very, very well. Big Z hit 6 threes last night to help them win. But my word, Rick, go look at what has happened to DJ Wagner. My lands, he's just awful.
I did not see that coming. I didn't think he was going to struggle in this way. I thought he was going to have a break. I was surprised last year went the way it did for him, and I thought this year would be a breakout year
I
for
did
him. He'd
too.
really hit his stride.
Ooh, it's not been that way. It's been the exact opposite. And I mean, they haven't exactly played very well, sitting at 2-1. And again, he's got supposedly the talent, right? Because he brought them all with him.
I think UK fans are going to enjoy comparing the two programs for the rest of this season if
I
it
think you're
continues
right.
on this trend. Cincinnati, big news for the Bearcats. They lost Dan Skillings for several weeks, according to Wes Miller. It seems like, based on the fan base's concern, you start getting the rumors leaking out. Somewhere between 2 to 6 weeks is what everyone seems to be thinking. A lot of people are looking at maybe the start of conference play for them, which will be December 30th at Kansas State. So that's a little bit away, but Skinny, this is a big impact locally potentially because UC plays at NKU next Tuesday, November 19th, and Xavier comes to UC for the Crosstown Shootout on December 14th, which is about 4.5 weeks away. How big of a deal do you think this is for Cincinnati? Does this potentially hurt their chances of making the tournament?
I will say this: if you can get him back by conference play, that would be great because I think they can scuttle their way through non-conference. As I had somebody who's actually a UC fan tell me the other day, listen, we're going to lose to Xavier with or without him because it's what we do. This is a UC fan speaking, but he said, he goes, you look at some of those other games, like Villanova's not close to. In fact, Villanova's terrible at the moment. They're not as daunting as it looked, right? I think Georgia Tech's also in the non-league. Dayton's on the non-league. I'm not sure how daunting
Yeah.
they are.
The upcoming schedule is this. They've got Nichols at home on Friday, then at NKU next week, as I mentioned, at Georgia Tech, Alabama State at home, at Villanova, Howard at home, Xavier at home, Dayton in that semi-home, the neutral site game, and then Grambling State to finish off the non-conference. So, I mean, while UC will be favored in every game, I think that's on that list, Skinny, there's still – you can say what you want about NKU, but you're going to NKU, a place that you've lost. You've got to go to Georgia Tech, which is another high major team's gym. You've got to go to Villanova, which you can say what you want about how bad they are. Kyle Neptune is a disaster, but it's at their gym. It's a high major opponent, and they are absolutely desperate. So take that for what you will. And then Xavier and Dayton are both local games for you, but good opponents. I mean, if you slip up and lose one or two of those games without Dan Skillings, it definitely changes your resume in a big way.
No question. I think you can survive most of that non-conference. I do. It's not as daunting as I thought it might be when the season started. He's a big loss. There's no question about that. But you do have some depth on the roster to, I think, at least get through it. I think my fear would be is how deep into the conference schedule is it before he comes back?
Yeah, I would agree that, and it seems like there's a lot of optimism that he'll be back. Well, not well before that, but by time for that December 30th game at Kansas State. The one thing that I think bodes well for this Cincinnati team is they have athleticism and length, and they rebound well. They have a lot of that. And that's where I think losing Dan Skillings would impact you the most. He's such a good rebounder,
Yeah.
and he's so big at that guard spot that it really kind of changes who you are as a team without him out there. But again, with this UC team, they have more rebounding. They have more length and athleticism to cover that up. They'll look a little bit different in that starting lineup, but they do have the players to make up for a loss like that. So
yeah, again, if I was a UC fan, you were to tell me I'll get him back 100% for the very first game of Big 12 play, I'd say sign me up for that right now.
Yeah, for sure. But it will be interesting to see how they fare because it felt like they were going to just cruise through non-conference play with him. Yep. Now without him, do any of these other games like the Georgia Tech game or like the Villanova game become a little bit more interesting? Xavier is 3-0 after a 94-80 win over IU Indy and a 94-57 win over Jackson State since we last talked. I did get a request that some of the Xavier fans on my message board, they would like your knee-jerk reaction to the Xavier team because you pegged them last year. The Xavier fans were all mad at you after that first week of the season when you told them all, this Xavier team isn't any good. They're going to have major issues throughout the year. They're going to struggle to go 500, which is exactly what happened. Do you have any knee-jerk reactions for this year's team?
Not yet until I see them play somebody of note, but I do think this team's going to score. It's going to be able to score, period, end of story. I think the thing you're going to be sitting pins and needles on is one more injury to the front court, Rick. And hopefully that doesn't happen. But my lands, you're going to be holding your breath of that. And against good teams. I mean, I hope they can win some games 88-85 because that's what's going to take.
Yeah, it does feel like there's going to be some issues defending the post, rebounding inside again. I mean, it's not the crew that they were running out there last year, but it's not a whole lot more physically imposing and improved, I don't think. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. NKU is 2-0 after a 74-62 loss at Florida State that we talked about. All right, 0-2, excuse me. NKU is 0-2 after the 74-62 loss at Florida State that we talked about last week and the 72-50 loss at Purdue. Any thoughts from, I know we talked about the Florida State game a little bit, but the Purdue game that you saw?
Again, it's just you're playing better athletes. You're not going to be able to run your stuff like you want to run it. You're going to be forcing shots. What were they, like 5 of 23 on threes? I'm doing that off the top of my head. I know it wasn't very good.
Yeah,
and that's what you're going to get against better teams like that, is you're going to be shooting a bunch of threes. And if you can get lucky and hit a couple, especially when they're contested, then you're going to hang around. And they hung around Purdue a little bit. It felt like it was kind of always in that 12 to 14 point range. And then Purdue finally pushed it out. I don't think either one of those losses is embarrassing. I just hope they got something out of it. Like, okay, you know what? These actions, when we play teams of our caliber and teams of our size and athleticism, we'll be able to finish them off. It's just hard to finish them off against two teams like that, especially on the road. Now, you get Nickel State coming, and you can't lose to Nickel State. Do you know why you can't lose to Nickel State? As you mentioned, they're getting ready to play UC. They're doing a 2-for in town.
Why can you not lose Nichols?
Because Nickel State somehow just won over a team, Mississippi University for women. I didn't know that they were playing teams like that.
Skinny, let me just tell you let me read the Wikipedia page for the Mississippi University for women.
Trust me, I've already done this myself. My buddy and I joked about this the other night. He goes, look up who Nickel State just played. And I did. I go, what? So go ahead and read it off because it is interesting. It's actually an interesting backstory, to be honest with you.
Interesting or concerning, one of the two. I'm not sure which direction to go with this.
Yeah.
Mississippi University for Women, MUW, or the W, as we all know them by, of course, is a coeducational public university in Columbus, Mississippi. It was formerly named the Industrial Institute and College for the Education of White Girls, and later the Mississippi State College for Women. Men have been admitted to MUW since 1982, and as of 2022, made up 23% of the student body. Skinny, I guess that is literally how you recruit if you're one of their male athletics teams, right? Is Mo mentioned this yesterday. Hey, man.
Ratio, yep.
It's 1-5 here, 1-4 here. You've got a good ratio. Yeah, they're Industrial Institute workers that want to be working on, I don't even know what some factory, I guess. They run factories or something. I don't know. But I can't imagine recruiting basketball players to the Mississippi University for Women. We've got a great squad this year at the W.
It's funny. Believe it or not, though, Nickel State actually, they played two. I don't think of the Power Five. They played two actually decent programs.
Yeah, New Mexico. They played Richard Pitino's guys.
Yes, and they played somebody else after that and played okay, I think.
Yeah, they played. Their first two games were against fairly legitimate teams. They played New Mexico was their first game, and then they played South Alabama, who's not very good, but is a legitimate,
at least legit. Yeah.
Yeah. Mid-major program, not exactly the Mississippi University for Women. So
yeah, exactly.
The crazy thing about Nichols, though, is they are just firing up threes. They have two guards who are shooting over 11 3-point attempts per game. The team took 37 3-point attempts in their first game and 36 3-point attempts in their second game. So it'll be an interesting style of play at Truist Arena tonight. All right, let's get into our pick'em segment. Skinny, you were a perfect 6-0 last week. You're now 42-30, starting to create some real profit there. People are following you. I'm still scuffling along. I was 3-3, 34-38 total. We killed people on our best bet of the week as we both took Georgia, and they got smoked by Ole Miss. So
Rick,
we were
the two games I loved the most last week were LSU getting 3 at home to Alabama and Georgia giving 3.5 on the road at Ole Miss, and both of them got smacked.
One thing that I'm starting to learn about this best bet segment is if we both like the game, you should not be on it. That's a bad call. We're better if we're opposite.
Correct.
Saturday at noon, we've got Ohio State at Northwestern. Buckeyes are a 28.5 point favorite. The total is 43.5.
Yeah, on the road. I don't know what the weather's going to be like. We're finally getting some November weather around, so it could be windy off the lake and maybe not a lot of points. I'll go Ohio State 30, Northwestern 3. So Northwestern covers, and it stays under the total.
All right, we're on totally opposite sides of this. I think Northwestern is basically the same team as Purdue. In fact, they beat Purdue in overtime a
Yes,
couple
they
of
did.
weeks ago. I'm going Ohio State 45, Northwestern 7. They score a touchdown unlike Purdue. OSU and the over for me. All right, Saturday at 1:30, we've got Murray State at Kentucky. The Cats are a 38.5-point favorite. The total is 48.5.
Murray's given up 59 points, I believe, to 4 different teams at their level this season. As bad as this Kentucky offense is, this is your last feel-good, get-right game because then it's Texas and Louisville after that. And I think they do whatever they feel like doing. Murray just, on paper, is just atrocious. I'll go Kentucky. I'll go Kentucky 60, Murray State 7.
All right, I like that. So Kentucky and the over. Skinny, this is like best bet of the week territory potentially. The fact, honestly, maybe just Kentucky's team total over, or just the over for this game at 48.5.
Yeah.
Kentucky is going to score over 48.5 points by themselves. It's like you said, Kentucky will name the score. It'll be whatever they want it to be because Murray State cannot stop anybody. They gave up 59 points to Missouri State last week.
Ooh.
Kentucky score. I'm putting that's it. 59 points for me. 59-0. Kentucky in the over.
Yep.
Saturday at 8 p.m. Cincinnati at Iowa State. Iowa State's an 8.5-point favorite. The total is 53.5.
I think UC plays this game tough. I think they hang around. I just don't know if it being on the road that they are able to pull off the win. I'll go Iowa State 30, UC 24.
All right, so that is Cincinnati and the over, just over by half a point. I bet Cincinnati last week. I got on board. I thought they were going to pull it out. I was on the bandwagon, and they let me down. So now I'm off. I'm going Iowa State 35, Cincinnati 23, Iowa State, and the over, which brings us to our best bet of the week.
I'm going to take Tennessee on the road, and maybe it's because I'm pissed off at Georgia. They look a mess offensively.
Carson Beck looks bad.
He looks bad. They don't run it very well.
But Tennessee's got a quarterback problem of their own right now.
They do, but I still like what they do defensively. I think they hang around in this game. I'll go Georgia 23, Tennessee 17. So I'm taking Tennessee with the points. I think they're getting 8.5, at least was what I saw the last I saw.
Yeah, so Tennessee plus 8.5 is what you're going with.
Yep.
It might be even higher than that now. I want to say I saw a double-digit number at one point. I kind of like that as a potential teaser game, taking Tennessee in a teaser situation. Like if you can get that up into double digits, 2-touchdown type of thing, I like Tennessee there as part of a teaser. I'm going with basically a teaser, alternate spreads. We're going to call it the 22.5 day here. OSU minus 22.5 at Northwestern, and Penn State minus 22.5 at Purdue. We're just going to pick on Northwestern and Purdue in the Big Ten. So there you go. That's our best bets for the week. And we've got our Ask Skinny Anything segment.
Actually, we didn't do the Bengals game.
Oh, I'm sorry. We did. That's right. What am I doing here? The Chargers are a 1.5-point favorite. The total for this game is 47.5, and that is the Sunday night game.
Sunday night game. They flexed the Sunday night. Boy, it feels like Vegas is begging you to take the Chargers here, right? I mean,
at 1.5, yeah, it feels that way.
So,
home game.
I'm gonna probably, this is gonna sound homer. I'm gonna take the Bengals to win this outright. This is kind of, they're 4-0 in their last 4 West Coast games, if you will. Winning at San Francisco last year, at Arizona last year, and then in 2021, kind of their big defining win coming out of their bye week. And this is coming out of a mini bye this week because they played the Thursday night game. They went to Las Vegas and got a huge win to kind of springboard their finish. They also had a win at Denver in that. So they've had good West Coast success. I think it continues for whatever goofy reason. I'll go Bengals 23, Chargers 20. So Bengals in the under for me.
I like that narrative you just wove. I'm going Bengals 24, Chargers 21. So it stays under the number as well. And Bengals get the outright win. So we're both on same side there, which takes us to our Ask Skinny Anything segment. Skinny, if you could add any former Bengals, one from defense and one from offense, to this current team, who would you pick?
I would add David Fulcher on defense.
There we go. Cardboard heroes. Shout out them all.
And on offense, I know everybody loves Chad more than AJ Green. I like AJ Green more than Chad. Give me AJ Green Give me AJ Green with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, and you're not stopping that offense.
Who's the best Bengals slot receiver of all time?
Well, see, I'm moving Jamar around, so Jamar can be my slot guy. T's played a little bit in the slot this year, so we're moving them all around.
Which I'm fine with, and I agree with you. You got to take AJ or Chad, but I was just trying to think if you were looking for like the slot guy to put with him and T.
But they really, I mean, a lot of teams haven't been 11 personnel or 3 wide receivers for all that long. They used it on certain downs. Now more teams use that on base downs, so there really hasn't been that guy, I guess, if you will, other than TB.
Yeah. All right. If Skinny were to host a podcast about anything other than sports, what would it be?
That's a good one. Anything other than sports?
Ghosts.
No, I'm a history guy. I'd love to do some kind of history type podcast and have guests discuss famous historical moments or something along that. I love history.
How did you not come up with the idea for Drunken History first? Have you ever seen that show?
I've not seen that, but that sounds delightful. I'll tell you another one I could do, and honestly, I think it'd be entertaining. Is I love airports. I grew up in an airline family, so we traveled a lot. I don't travel a ton now. I just travel mostly Bengals weekends and here and there to go places. I love airports. I love hanging out in airports. I love drinking in airports. I love people watching in airports. I could do like a podcast of just talking about people walking down the concourse as I'm sipping a beer. Call it two beers with watching the people walking down the concourse, and I just comment. I rip them. Some people you go, oh man, he's dressed nicely, or wow, look at her. I mean, that to me is highly entertaining.
I would listen if you walked around CVG's terminal area and were just going up to like sitting down next to random people and be like, hi, I do a podcast, and then you interviewed them and drank a beer with them. That would be an incredible podcast. I'd listen to it.
Yeah, you're like a mom who's got the 3 kids. It's like, how are you going to handle this? And she's stressing out. It'd be fun to watch. And then the kids are running around like crazy people, annoying everybody. And you know what the flight's going to be like. You just know what it's going to be like.
And you saddle up to the guy that looks like he's homeless. You're like, all right, let me see what this guy's story is. It turns out he's like the owner of some startup out in Silicon Valley.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. We already asked that one. What grade? And this came from, of course, this week I retweeted the picture from Beechwood. You and I were out educating the nation's youth on podcasting this week.
Sure.
So, and because of that picture, someone asked, what grade and subject would Skitty want to teach?
I'd probably do English or social studies at the high school level. The teacher that we met with that day, she couldn't have been any nicer, Rick. I need to show you the handwritten card that she wrote actually as we were doing the thing, because it was actually, she was pointing to some of the things we said in the thing. So she actually was writing that card to us as the thing was going on. But remember the first thing she said to me? She came out to the hall and introduced herself, and I introduced you to her, and she said, hang on a second, I got to go settle these guys down. And I'm thinking that's probably what a lot of 6th grade class is all about, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it just is. And I admire those that can handle that portion of the program.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, it was just they're fine. The kids were great, but it was just, imagine trying to like communicate through those kids. I mean, we were asking for them to throw out the names of their favorite podcasts or whatever. And I mean, the room just turns into chaos as soon as you start asking them to speak at all. It just 6th grade seems like a wild group to teach for sure.
Yeah. I'd like the high schoolers because, at least for the most part, if it's a decent level class, that they're taking it serious because they want to go to college or whatever. And if there's the one unruly guy or two, I can handle that. I had an English teacher back at Dixie Heights, Lee Beach. He was a terrific teacher. One of my favorites. Everybody I know loved him. He was a different cat, but everybody loved him. But occasionally you'd have a guy that would fall asleep in the class, right? He just would put his head down and nod off. And Mr. Beach would take this big, thick dictionary, and from under the desk, he would swing it, hit the bottom of the desk. Dude, you've never seen so many people fly out of a seat in your life and land on the floor. It was always hysterical because he lived for those moments. During exams, he would get a chair and sunglasses and sit in the chair on top of his desk so you couldn't see where his eyes were going. He was brilliant. I loved him as a teacher.
Yeah, see, this is for public school kids, they're like, oh, wow, that's amazing. But if you went to a private school, that's just scratching the surface because at private schools, teachers are allowed to do whatever the hell they want. Now you can't do any of that stuff because people call their parents or whatever. But back in the day, I can tell this because he's gone now. Rest in peace to Clay Eifert, the former principal at Holy Cross. But he used to have something called a dunce cap in his when he taught math. He became a principal, but he was also a math teacher. He would make you put on one of those plastic football helmets, and then he'd have a wiffle ball bat that was a little corked, and he just, I mean, it wasn't corked. It was like wadded up at the end, so it wasn't as hard, and he would just whack you in the head with the bat just for being dumb.
And I love Clay Eifert, God rest his soul too. He was a great coach, and I just loved Clay. But I thought the dunce cap was where you were going to end that. Like, that's kind of enough as it is, right?
No.
You got to go sit with the dunce cap on.
No, then he'd whack you with a baseball bat, a wiffle ball bat after he put that on you. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have. That's so egregious. I wouldn't have even told that if he were still alive, because I'd be worried about people coming after him retroactively. You can't do that type of stuff in 2024, Skinny.
I don't think you can put the dunce cap on him in 2024.
Yeah, that's some 2008 teaching right there. That's before social media was a huge thing.
Yep.
That's the problem with teaching the high schoolers, though, as opposed to the middle schoolers. The social media is going to be a much bigger issue for you in your grammar class.
Probably, but I don't know. I'd rather have that level, because there is some small level of maturity there.
Yeah. All right, that's all we got.
All right, appreciate it very much. Thanks for the questions. Hopefully we'll be back to a normal looking podcast next week. Appreciate those of you sticking with us. Hopefully this worked out well enough. For Rick Boring, I'm Richard Skinner. It's been the Skinny Podcast, the weekly potpourri edition, presented by Blake the Attorney Maisland.